All right, everybody, welcome to Coffee and the Crusades, the one and only Real Crusades history live stream that we do every single Tuesday right here on the Real Crusades history live streaming channel. So I'd like to welcome you guys to our little hangout here that we like to do. It should be fun. I am kind of tired today, so I may not be the best company, but I will, I'm here for you guys, and I want to talk about medieval stuff. So let's do it. I've got my coffee in my outstanding Knights Templar mug, as you guys can see right here, from the Real Crusades History Store, which is always worth checking out. You can get Crusades gear, and I will also point everybody's attention to knightsofthecross.com. In case this is your first stream, which it's always somebody's first stream, I was involved in the creation of a TV show about the Crusades called Knights of the Cross. And if you go to knightsofthecross.com, you can watch episode 1. Check it out. And from now until July 31st, we are raising funds for episode 2, which is going to be about the Battle of Jaffa. So that should be a good show to check out. So kick in a few bucks if you like what you see on knightsofthecross.com and help out with the production of episode 2. And that's from now until July 31st is when we're raising funds for that. So check that out, guys. So how's everybody doing? The way we do things here is we take questions and we just talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. Otherwise, I just start rambling about random medieval topics. So I don't know if you guys want that. You probably want to come up with some questions. So what's going on? Well, the channel is doing well still. Real Crusades history. Things are going well with the channel. I'm currently, I just released a couple of new documentaries on there, which are available. One is one of the long form compilations of the first, second, third Crusade documentaries, which a lot of people like those. So that's why I do put those out, because there are just a lot of people who want something that is just massive. And so I try to compile the stuff that works together in a series into full-on documentaries so people can watch those. But right now I'm working on a documentary about Viking Ireland. So the Viking invasions of Ireland, and that's pretty well, a lot of progress has been made on that. I did get a couple of Irish native-born Irish to do narration on some of it, which has been really cool. It adds a lot to the atmosphere, I feel like. So that is very cool. You guys will be able to check that out when it comes live, probably towards the end of this month. And Lambert says they're much better than studio-produced documentaries. Well, thank you so much, my friend. Jonathan wants to talk about the last stand the Templars made at Acre in 1291. Well, yeah, that's an interesting thing to talk about without question. And let's see. Jonathan says, did the Mamluks try to take the knights as slaves when they tried to surrender the citadel when Acre fell? No, that would have been not really feasible in terms of how things were negotiated. And the Mamluks knew that. When they were actually talking back and forth and trying to come to terms, they did come to some kinds of terms that the Templars, this is, of course, toward the end of the siege, when the Templars and the Hospitallers were holed up in the citadel, and the Mamluks were on the verge of breaking through, and there was negotiation between the Templars and Hospitallers and the Mamluks. And the Mamluks did agree to something. The Templars and the Hospitallers seemed to come to terms with them in some respect. However, the key moment came when the Mamluks actually started to enter the citadel. Something happened that, from the perspective of the Templars and Hospitallers, was a violation of the agreement they had made. And what that seems to be is that the Mamluks seem to be behaving as though they were going to seize, control, or take captive some of the women and children within the citadel who were hiding out there. They were laying hands on them, behaving as though they were arguing over who was going to get who, behaving in a way that the Templars and Hospitallers had a problem with. And they felt that this was a violation of the terms. Apparently the terms that they agreed to were that these people would be able to be escorted safely out of the citadel. When that happened, this is actually one of the most heroic and interesting moments in the history of the Crusades. The Templars and the Hospitallers immediately killed the Mamluks who had already come into the citadel. And apparently it wasn't that many. It was enough that they were able to overwhelm them pretty easily. They killed them, slammed the doors shut, and basically set themselves in a position to just fight to the death, so that's interesting. You think about that is a type of courage that you do have to take note of. I mean, individuals who are willing to say, you know what, no, we have a huge problem with this, and we're going to sell our lives to stop you from doing this. Now, the interesting thing about this is we do know that after this happened, the Templars and the Hospitallers were able to get some of those people on rope ladders down to boats and get them to safety. So lives were saved because of this, but those did not include the lives of the knights themselves, who basically committed themselves to a standoff to the death. And they did what they wanted to do, and that they wanted to give their lives to protect these people and to allow them to escape. This is the history. This is what happened, guys. I mean, it's in the source material if you want to look at it. But they fought to the death at that point, and the Mamluks did eventually break in, and the Templars fought them until they were dead. I mean, they went down fighting, and at some point too, the Mamluk artillery caused the citadel to collapse, and so many Mamluks and Templars and Hospitallers were killed just with that collapsing, building material. So, really great story, really great moment in history of the Crusades. I mean, it's a tragic moment of warfare, but an inspiring type of heroic moment as well. I think that regardless of your perspective, it's a moment that can be considered heroic, regardless of what your particular biases are or perspectives are on it. Yeah, really good stuff. If you guys want to watch, if you go to my channel and just search for 1291, you will find a video I did where I discuss the last stand of the Templars. So that is something you can check out. And good to see everybody here. Tom and Tony and Lambert says, I've been reading a lot about the 100 Years' War for the first time. Is it true that the first time the English deployed the longbow en masse for the first time was at the Battle of, I don't know how to pronounce that. I would have to look up how to pronounce that, the name of that town. In fact, you can tell me, Lambert, if you know. But and I'm always very cautious about just pronouncing something the way it looks to me. When I'm making videos, I have a source that I go to for pronunciation. It's a website called Forvo. You guys might know about it. It's outstanding. It collects native speakers pronouncing a word. This is how I got through my series on the Mongol conquests or the Mongol invasions of Poland. Polish stuff is hard to pronounce, and I had a lot of Polish commenters say that they were very impressed with my pronunciation of these Polish words. All I did was I went to Forvo and just listened to native speakers pronounce these town names and city names, and I just copied that, and that worked. So, okay, but back to your question. You know what? I would have to look at that, but I did recently read in a book by John Gillingham I'm reading a book right now by John Gillingham about the history of the British Isles from 1066 to like 1485. And he actually mentions that the Hundred Years' War is kind of overplayed for the use of the longbow. And I wish Rand was here because he could confirm this for us. But Gillingham mentioned that this type of bow had been used for quite a long time. But what was different about the Hundred Years' War was this was the first time these very large and organized units of archers were used, and that's why it was so devastating. I would have to maybe double check that, but I did just read that as I'm reading through this excellent book by Gillingham about the history of England and Scotland and Ireland and Wales during this period. Really, really good book. The name of it, I should get the name of it for you guys so you can check it out, just in case somebody's interested. It's downstairs right now, so I can't. A Conquest, Catastrophe, and Recovery by Gillingham. Really good stuff. John Gillingham is just an outstanding historian. And Alexander says it's National Swedish Day. That's pretty cool. I have heard a little bit about the Swedish Crusade. My understanding is that it's a little bit of an obscure event, that there's some talk that it may be mostly legendary. I don't know very much about it. I'll just be honest with you, Alexander. I've read of it in passing when reading general histories of the Northern Crusades, like the famous Eric Christensen book, for example, which is really good. Okay. What else do we have here today? Bleak wants to know why there wasn't more participation in the Crusades from the Scandinavian countries in the later Crusades. Well, I'm not sure how much of that is true. I do think we have to kind of keep in mind that during the height of the Age of Crusades, the Scandinavian countries were a bit more minor powers compared to places like the Kingdom of France, the Holy Roman Empire, the Kingdom of England. And some of the Scandinavian countries were heavily involved in the Northern Crusades. Like some of these areas that had more direct involvement in these other theaters, like the Spanish kingdoms, for example. Sweden was heavily involved in the Baltic Crusades, and also Denmark as well. So that might play a role in it, but I do think there were plenty of people from those regions who were going to the Holy Land theaters all through, the 12th and 13th centuries. Let's see. Jonathan wants to know, why was King Guy released without ransom? And why did Conrad not allow him to enter Tyre, forcing him to besiege Acre and set up camp there? I think that it's pretty clear that Saladin released Guy because he understood that this would create a political problem in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, or the remaining, the rump Crusader states at that point. And he was right about that. Guy was more valuable to Saladin, kind of stirring up trouble out and about, than he was to being ransomed. I think maybe Saladin knew too that would Guy have been ransomed, especially that early in the crusade. Once the Anglo-Norman forces involved got there in larger numbers, then I think he would have been, certainly. But that was a lot later. Guy was very much out of favor in the aftermath of what happened at Hattin, as I imagine we can all understand why that is. Conrad, and the answer to the other part of the question is that Conrad was fully intent on taking the crown from Guy. Conrad shows up and there is no Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Kingdom of Jerusalem is gone. This is something I think we have to kind of remember about the Third Crusade. People often say things like, well, the Third Crusade was about limiting the extent of, well, I've heard some historians say this. The Third Crusade was about limiting the extent of Saladin's victories. But I'm not going to clear my throat on mic. But no, the Third Crusade was not about that. The Third Crusade was about retaking territory from Saladin. Unless we can say that it was in part it was about stopping Saladin from taking Tyre, which is true. Conrad made that happen before the Third Crusade got there. But yeah, the Third Crusade was about retaking the kingdom, not limiting. It was about stopping Saladin's war effort. But the conquest had been done. By the time the Third Crusade shows up in the Holy Land, Saladin has won. He's taken the kingdom of Jerusalem. He's taken it. He's got everything. He's got Acre, like you just mentioned, that Acre had to be besieged. He's got Jerusalem. He's got everything. So the Third Crusade was not about limiting what Saladin had done. It was about trying to reverse it. And the question is, did it succeed in doing that? And the answer to that is, yeah, in a big way. Not entirely. There were limits to what it was able to recapture. But it retook a huge and important portion of Palestine, the most important part of Palestine, from Saladin. That's why I'm always emphasizing that the Third Crusade was such a successful operation. In a lot of ways, the Third Crusade resembles the First Crusade, because the First Crusaders show up and they have to conquer the Holy Land. The Third Crusade shows up and it has to conquer the Holy Land. There's nothing there. The Christians have lost everything. They have Antioch and Tripoli and a few castles up there, and they have Tyre. So it's a little bit better than what the First Crusade has to deal with, but not much. And then, he forced him to besiege Acre. Yeah, because again, Conrad was of the position that Guy had no legitimacy, and the truth is that the nobles of the Kingdom of Jerusalem agreed. The only thing that saves Guy's position in any way is the fact that Richard the Lionheart shows up and advocates for him to some extent. But even Richard wasn't willing to go that far. In the end, Richard recognizes Conrad as the choice of the high court for their new king. It's only the fact that Conrad gets assassinated by the assassin clan that changes. Always a lot of good topics to talk about, right, guys? And just a quick reminder, if you have not done so, check out knightsofthecross.com. This is a website featuring a TV series that I helped create about the Crusades. You can watch episode 1 there. And if you like what you see, consider helping us crowdfund episode 2. We crowdfunded entirely episode 1. It was outstanding. You guys really helped out. And we created a great show that we're very proud of. You can watch that at knightsofthecross.com. And if you like what you see, you can help us make episode 2. So do check that out. And then Tanner has some stuff about what we just went over about the Mamluks taking over Acre. Jonathan says Ridley Scott will answer for his sins before God. Yeah, it's true. It's very true that Ridley Scott's movie is just entirely inaccurate. It's not history in any way whatsoever. It's just not. And then Aleem Tariq says, just wanted to thank you for your endeavor. Listening to your podcast on the Crusades sowed the seed for what would grow to be a life-affirming passion for me. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate hearing that. And that's the whole point. The whole point of doing this is to spread a love of history and get people excited about this history. So, yeah. Bleak says, how big a force would it have taken to reconquer the Holy Land? How would you have broken down the types of troops needed? Wow, that's a fascinating question. I don't think there's a hard and fast answer to that. I think that, especially if we're talking about the 13th century, at which point, You have the Muslims in a more powerful position, a more united position. I think that at least 30 to 50,000 troops, which that is an absolutely enormous number for the Middle Ages, is the reality. In terms of how that would have been broken down, I think you've got to have a very substantial force of heavy cavalry. You also need plenty of Turkoples. You need a lot of infantry. I don't think, I think the more important factor would have been that what it really would have taken would have been a more, aside from just talking about the numbers involved, like how big an army would they have needed? They would have needed a more cooperative effort long term among the various European powers, especially among three key powers: Kingdom of England, Kingdom of France, Holy Roman Empire. Those three need to be involved in a joint effort long term that's coordinated, that's well organized, that consistently supplies forces to the Holy Land. Because it's not just about like, let's send over one big army one time. That could help with maybe initially taking things. But again, what were the Crusader states always worried about? They were always concerned that the Westerners were going to show up, do a crusade, conquer stuff, and then leave. And that's an understandable concern. This was the real dilemma of the Holy Land. So what this tells us is that to really hold this territory, what you need is a cooperative effort that's long-term, that's consistently renewed, to supply, to maintain the Holy Land. Now, it would have also helped to have other powers involved, maybe like the Scandinavian kingdoms, as were mentioned earlier, Sicily, even places like Scotland, just, all these other kingdoms could have been involved. But you really do need those big three, especially France and the Holy Roman Empire, especially. I think at the minimum, you have to have those two cooperating together to kind of maintain this thing. And it would have had to have been consistent. It would have had to have been the sort of thing, okay, so we're going to have this many troops there at all times. We're going to supply them in this way consistently. Probably all these powers would have need to have had outposts at Cyprus to kind of act as sort of a staging point for all their operations. And the point here is that, was this even feasible given the political situation of 13th century Europe? It would have required overcoming some habits and political issues that seem to preclude this kind of thing from ever being done. I mean, imagine the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of France just getting along, for one thing. They would have needed to consistently cooperate at this. This would have needed to have been a policy that was maintained. Because the reality is, the Holy Land was just so remote from, even with Cyprus, it was just kind of remote from the main theaters the power center of Latin Christendom. And the reality is the Crusader states were always, to some extent, an appendage of Latin Christendom, not particularly well tended to. They were tended to some extent, but there was a lot left to be desired toward that, as we can see how things turned out. What do you guys think about that? I'd actually like to hear some opinions from you guys about how you feel the Holy Land could have been better maintained long term. What do you guys think? Okay. I'm going to get to some other questions here. As we get toward the end of this, I always start looking at all these great questions that you guys have, and I'm trying to decide which one to pick, So good questions from you guys. And we got Sam in the audience. Sam did a great job talking with us last time about the Ottoman Empire. He'll be back this month to talk to us. And Helena Schroeder will be with us next week. And also I'm going to try to have my friend Joe on, who is an expert on medieval Sicily. I'm going to email him. He's a really interesting guy. I think you guys would enjoy getting to talk to him about medieval Sicily. Okay, but yeah, but before we go to, I want to know what you guys think about that last point. Like, what do you guys think would have been necessary to maintain the Holy Land, in the face of powers like the Ayyubids and the Mamluks later on toward the end? So, yeah, I'll let you guys kind of throw some participation back at us. Oh, and here we got one from Lambert. Looks like he's going to talk about it. If France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire would have committed a steady and consistent supply of troops as part of their conscription, it may have made a difference in stabilizing and making Jerusalem autonomous. Right, exactly. I think it needed to be some kind of policy. It could not be the sort of thing. The way it was done was every now and then somebody would decide to send troops or would decide to go on crusade. That didn't work, clearly, because that would happen, and then the Holy Land would kind of be back where it had been before. So, and then Alexander says Egypt needed to be taken. Exactly, it did need to be taken. And the only way that could have happened would have been a cooperative crusade between those powers. It's fascinating. Louis IX, his crusade in the 1240s and 1250s, he came very close to conquering Egypt. He really did. He didn't have a large enough army. He just didn't. But he still came close. I mean, he was finally defeated by the Ayyubids. Had to put aside all of their quarrels and get together to defeat him. But it was a close run thing for them, which it should not have been. It should have been far. He really shouldn't have been able to get past the coast. But that kind of shows you, what if he'd had the full force of the Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of England with him and other minor powers? They could have done it. So. And Taco Cruiser says that Manuel Comnenus tried to help the Crusaders capture Egypt. That's true. And the big problem with the Byzantines was Manuel Comnenus spent most of his reign focused on the West, especially Italy. He trying to restore Byzantine control over Italy. That's an interesting thing about these more powerful Byzantine emperors like Basil II, Manuel Comnenus. They tended to shift their focus away from the Eastern Front, which is interesting. And it shows in how if the Byzantines had been more committed to the Eastern situation, that would have, I think it would have allowed them to exercise a far more real sovereignty over the Crusader states. And it would have also allowed for a lot of it. Like, for example, I think the Byzantines, if they had committed to it, could have easily taken Aleppo during that period, during, John Comnenus and Manuel Comnenus. In part, I think they were worried about emboldening the Crusader states. They were worried that if they achieved too much victory in Syria, that this would have allowed the Crusaders to get too powerful, which is, again, think about how it's kind of self-defeating that is long term. I'm speculating to some extent about that, but I think it's very debatable that that's kind of what was going on. So, which is one of the reasons I often say that maybe long term you needed a Latin power, in Constantinople to really kind of get things done. So, yeah, and Taco points out that the Normans posed a more existential threat to the Byzantines. Yeah, I think to some extent that's true, but we know that long term that wasn't really the case. I think if you could if you could take the future, if you could show the 15th century to Manuel Comnenus or Basil II, I think that would have changed their attitude about the threat of the Normans. The Normans were definitely a real threat to Byzantium, but on the other hand, maybe the Byzantines could have managed the Normans better, used certain Normans as kind of clients in ways that would have neutralized the Normans that wanted to conquer them. Anyway, we're kind of at the end now, guys. Let's see here. So I want to get to some of you guys, some comments that you all made about maybe what you would have needed to hold Ultramar long term. Bleak says a garrison of 20,000 troops stationed Ultramar. Yeah, I absolutely think something like that was needed, like those type of numbers. It's amazing that with the tiny numbers they had, the Crusaders were able to hold that territory at all. But yeah, you needed you needed this more long-term organized effort in cooperation, kind of what the church was envisioning, quite frankly. I mean, the church, one of the fascinating things about the Crusades is the vision the church was projecting of this kind of united effort among these various Christian kingdoms to be involved in this project of the Crusades. And the church was right in that this stuff could have been done with that kind of cooperation. It's interesting how that ideal was never realized, and in many ways, not even close to being realized. Like the ideal the church had of kind of the Crusades as the end of internal conflict within Christendom, that was the ideal, without question, that the popes were projecting. It was never done, not even close. I mean, the whole time the Crusades were going on, the Western powers were fighting each other the whole time. I mean, it was the reality of politics. But it's interesting, that tension between that vision that the church had, which in many ways, the great powers of the West, like, France and the Holy Roman Empire, they did endorse that concept. They kind of did acknowledge that this was the higher, in fact, they fully acknowledged that this was the higher thing to be done. But, they always blamed the other guy for why that wasn't possible. Why can't we all just do the crusade? Well, because the King of France, he won't stop invading my land. Or, that was Richard Lionheart's argument. And, it was a reasonable argument, really. So. Okay. Let's see what else you guys have. Let's do one more. Okay. Bleak has actually a breakdown on his ideal force for holding the Holy Land. 8,000 heavy cavalry, 10,000 light cavalry, 20,000 infantry, 5,000 archers, and 2,000 crossbowmen. That sounds pretty good. But again, what would have needed to have been done was that type of force, but consistently maintained. Like, not just like one time we're going to throw that in there. There needed to be some kind of program in place to keep that maintained by those powers that were capable of maintaining it. So anyway, okay. Great discussion, guys. I enjoyed it. Glad we got to talk. So let's come back here next Tuesday, same time. We'll talk with Dr. Schroeder. Helena Schroeder will be here to chat with us, and we can do Coffee and the Crusades again. So knightsofthecross.com. Do please check out our TV show project there. Enjoy your coffee, enjoy Crusades history and medieval history in general. And I will see you guys again here next Tuesday. Have a good one.